So now we are going to hear from Starla Garcia. Starla is an intuitive eating dietitian, Olympic trial qualifier, and all-around badass. Help me welcome to the virtual stage, Starla Garcia.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here today. I'm super excited to dive into this topic. I feel like there's a lot of different touch points that I have experienced with insecurity over the time of being an athlete and then being in the professional space as a dietitian. If you guys haven't looked me up yet, I do have several articles out recently talking about my journey as a young athlete all the way until how I qualified for the trials, and then also talking about being a person of color in the running community. It's a pretty hot topic at this point, but I'll touch on different points around being a person of color in the running community and also as a professional in the healthcare space. So I really always like to start off with, again, how I started out in running. I'm actually originally from South Texas area, so if you look up or you Google on Google Maps, Far Texas is this little tiny town by the border of Mexico, and I'm from that area of Texas, and so it's a pretty homogenous area. I have a very middle-class family. We were very lucky to have a lot of different things available to us, despite a lot of the lower income families living in that area. But I would say I was pretty lucky right from the get-go. I have two sisters. I'm a middle child, so I'm not sure if middle child syndrome really exists. But again, I felt like growing up, I had a lot of attention from especially my parents because I was the athlete. And so I got a lot of extra care from that point. I remember starting out in running and being really good at it and having a lot of positive feedback all the time from my parents, especially my father. And so being told that I was constantly a good athlete, being a good runner, and then being cared for like I was an athlete, it really, really instilled and provided a lot of confidence into what I did as an athlete growing up. I would say the very first time I ever advocated for myself as a Hispanic athlete started when I was in high school. I remember starting in my freshman year and running really well and running in varsity team and going to my coach and saying, hey, I think I really like this and I really see myself running in college. What do you think about that? Like, do you think that is possible for me? And my coach said, I think that's possible, but you're going to have to work really hard. And being a very type A person, an overachieving person, and constantly being told that I was good at something, I just felt like, hey, I think I can do it. Like, tell me what to do, and I'm going to execute it as well as possible. My dad has a running joke that if I was constantly being compared to my older sister, he said that I would probably be the most successful out of everybody because I would just work my butt off all the time. If my dad said that I would work like 10 hours, 12 hours a day, that's just what I did. So I told my coach, I think I'm up for it. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And so from that point on, I committed a lot of time and effort into my first years of running in high school to being a better athlete. So running the miles, doing the workouts, and all of those things. I was pretty lucky to be on a team that ran really well, going from very small meets in the district area into regional and then state meets every single year. But I felt like, I was working so hard and it just wasn't paying off. And with runners, if you put in the time and the effort, eventually you'll see results. And I just felt like I was finally at a point where I was not seeing the results that I wanted. And I remember finally going into my junior year and feeling like the upperclassman and constantly being told that I was going to be good, I was going to be a good athlete. And when you're a junior and you're an athlete, there's a lot of pressure to perform well in order to get scouted or to get recruited for universities. So I was finally reaching this point in my career where I had to step up and be an upperclassman, or else I was not going to be recruited and eventually move out of the valley. So that's what we call the South Texas area is Rio Grande Valley. So I just felt like it was finally time for me to finally put up some fast times so I could be recruited. So whenever I would ever go to the state meet in cross country and I would be up in line with everybody else, I would constantly look around, and my team was the only Hispanic team all the time. And I constantly felt very insecure about that. And I had to work through a lot of those issues at a very young age of, why doesn't anybody else look like me? What do I do about that? How do I become good like everybody else? And most runners are typically white, very thin, or come from larger cities. So it was very unlikely that our team would ever make it there, but it was also very unlikely that we would run really well enough to get noticed. So I felt like I always had to go that extra mile. I always had to put in work, and I always had to put in the grades too in school in order to get recruited and to feel like I was worthy enough of a scholarship. So I came to the very last meet of my junior year. My coach said, "Hey, you've been working your butt off. Why don't you step up and, move from the mile race up into the 2 mile?" And I was so afraid of being a 2 mile runner. I didn't want to increase in distance. I felt like I couldn't compete with everybody else. And my coach said, "You're an upperclassman. Why don't you do it for the team, Starla?" And I felt like she knew exactly what to tell me in order for me to step up, because it was beyond me now that I was trying to lead the team. It was no longer about me. It was about everybody else. And so I trusted her and I said, okay, why not? I ended up running the fastest time of my entire career that day, or at that time, and I ended up making it into the regional meet, and so I ended up winning the race. I ran, I think, like maybe a minute faster than I had ever done up until that point in high school, and I was walking into the regional race with the fastest time. Just unknowingly trusting whatever my coach had told me, whatever we were doing. And again, I was faced with this insecurity of being at a larger meet and not seeing anybody else like me. And so again, when I got to the race, even though I was worthy time-wise and work ethic, I did not feel like I could actually do it, that I could make it to the next level on my own and make it to the state meet. And so I got to the race and I got third, and I did not win, and only the first 2 women make it. And so I walked off that track very disappointed, discouraged, didn't know what to do, and I was a really young athlete. And so I just vowed to myself, hey, after this point, there is no more what ifs or if I could or any of that anymore. That my senior year is going to be different. And so I made myself that promise that things were going to be different and that I was going to think about running differently. So I approached my senior year. Again, I went to the summer months. I worked really, really hard and had an outstanding senior year. I ended up getting recruited by several schools in Texas and a few schools out of state. But there was still this pulling of that I still was not good enough. And it always reverted back to, I don't look like everybody else. My skin is different. I look different. My body is different. How do I fit in and how do I feel worthy? And so during that time, I was faced with a lot of academic pressures. Again, being a type A overachiever person, when you're really stressed, sometimes you just don't think about food. And so unintentionally, I had some weight loss happen. And so I had about 10 pounds of weight loss drop. And I had a lot of positive feedback because my body had changed. Even though my mileage was changing and my volume and intensity in my workouts were changing, it was always attributed back to how my body or my weight had changed that had made me a better runner. It was never because of the depth of the runner that I had become or the amount of work that I had done previously to get me to that point. So again, being a young runner, I gravitated towards that, and I felt like, hey, if being thin and losing weight is going to make me fast, then what else can I do to help myself fit in more and to become a better runner? So I just started restricting slowly throughout that year, and at that time, it was called female athlete triad. And so a lot of young runners are faced with this problem, and it's underfueling to where you can't sustain a healthy body image any longer. And so that can feed into an eating disorder. I wouldn't say that I had an eating disorder at that time when I was a high school athlete, but it did manifest itself into disordered eating first. So I ended up signing with University of Houston. So I'm going to go through here. This was me in my high school years. You can see that I'm a very healthy looking runner, but I was already having disordered eating tendencies. Through my first year of college, after signing on with University of Houston, I ended up still having a lot of these disordered eating tendencies, and I had a phenomenal freshman year. I was on the top 5 all-time list at University of Houston for indoor. I was making it to USA Juniors in the summer. So I had an all-around just fantastic year where every time I stepped on the track or on the cross-country race, I was getting faster and faster. When I got to University of Houston, however, even though I was flourishing on the track, I was also faced with a lot more insecurities of being at a higher level and being one of the only or very few women of color on the track. So again, I was constantly comparing my body, my capabilities, and what I was able to do on my own to everybody else. And I just felt like I was not ever good enough. You can see here again, this is one of the largest races that I did. This was the USA Junior track meet in Eugene, Oregon. So this is the USA Junior Championships. I was there in the 5,000 meter, and I'm just looking around like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? This is so nerve-wracking. And again, I'm the only woman of color on the line. I think to actually get into that race, I had to run under 18-minute 5,000 meter, and my qualifying time was a 17:37. So it was a very good runner as a 19-year-old kid. But again, I was faced with a lot of insecurity because there was nobody else like me that I saw that was running very fast, that was in a healthy body, and my peers were not like me. So it was a very difficult time for me. Despite, again, that's me up close. So just having disordered tendencies still. And then again, after the meet, I was very, very happy, very lucky to be there. My coach advocated for me. He said that I had very good times and that I deserved to be there. But inside, I just did not feel like I deserved it yet. So after that, I ended up not running as well as I wanted to. And so after that meet, unfortunately, I sank into my eating disorder. So the rest of my collegiate years were never, ever as good as this meet, unfortunately, because I was dealing with a lot of eating disorder problems. I was really lucky to stay on the team at University of Houston throughout that time. They kept me on because if I were to move back home, there were going to be no medical services that I could afford. So they helped me pay for medical services. And then they also helped me get connected with a therapist and then a dietitian at that time. So I was really, really fortunate for my university and especially the athletic department to be ensuring that the health or mental health of their athletes was their top priority. So they allowed me to stay under the condition that I would go to therapy. And so being a type A person, I said, yes, I don't want to fail. I cannot fail because if I fail, I'd have to move back home and I don't know what's going to be there for me. So I just stayed. And so I stayed in limbo for about 2.5 years until I actually started to make some progress. This is me at the very, rock bottom. And so these photos are actually really hard to see just because I think a lot of people don't really realize how huge of a problem this is in women athletics. And I think this could definitely change by just how we are talking to each other about body image, dieting, and encouraging women athletes to be healthy for themselves and not just for their sport. So this is me again. So a huge difference from here and then here. So luckily, with all the therapy, when I finally got into the very end of my senior year, I entered recovery. And this was a really nice time for me. You can tell, again, my body language is different. I'm much more confident. And I finally restored my weight. So working through all those insecurities definitely helped me overcome my eating disorder. There was a lot of still questions pending even after graduation, and when I was in recovery was, how did I get here? And that was always the problem I was dealing with. Was I understood what was happening and what I was putting myself through, but there was always this question of, how the heck did I get here? And I just had to figure that out first before I could really move on into adulthood. So after graduation, I ended up going into grad school, and I used one of my years of eligibility left. I took a year of, just redshirting and figuring myself out with therapy and my dietitian. So I used that year to still run, and then I was in grad school. And during my grad school coursework, there was a lot of talk about racial inequality, health disparity, and I was even in research at MD Anderson along Latino feeding practices along the Texas-Mexico border and acculturation. And so when I was reading through that literature, it was so eye-opening for me to understand how acculturation, assimilation had affected me. At a really young age. I was second, third generation, middle class family. I was not from an immigrant family. My grandmother is an immigrant, but my two parents were already either first generation or second generation American. So it was really interesting for me to find myself in this place that was very homogenous and Latino, having a lot of American culture from marketing, TV, radio, everything like that. In magazines, I would just see white women, and then around me, it was very different. So having to take in very different experiences of being an American definitely affected me. And I think what I saw as healthy or what successful was as a young female athlete. So after graduation, when I finally did that research, it was just, why the heck didn't I learn this in school? And I was studying nutrition, and why was nobody talking about this? Why wasn't anybody talking about health disparities, socioeconomic status, and why was I just learning about how to be healthy or how to not become obese? And so when I went through that research, it really opened up a whole nother door on how the insecurities that I felt as a young athlete were affecting me, and how could I move forward with my life. Fast forward to about I would say like 5 years after graduation and 5 years after graduate school. So I had finally become a dietitian. I started running again, and I had qualified for Boston. I had done 2 previous marathons before that. I was very lucky to qualify right off the first 2. And then I went to Boston 2018. And again, you can see around me, I'm one of very few Hispanics in the photo. And that's just pretty prominent in marathoning and even just distance running in general, is there's very few women that look like me and my color and the foods that I like. So I thought this photo would be really interesting to share, because here I am at this huge prestigious race where anybody can go into if you have the time, but there's nobody else like me. That race was just so difficult. It was probably the hardest race close to the Olympic trials that I've ever ran in. It was about 30-degree weather. The headwind was like 40 miles an hour, and it was raining nonstop. So talk about a snowstorm and like a hurricane all in one. So it was very difficult, but a lot of times whenever I'm racing, I think back to that time when I felt so insecure and all of the moments that I pulled myself out of that. So anything difficult that I find in a race, I always draw back on running and how much I've been able to overcome from my eating disorder. After this race, I ran another race in California, and it was probably my breakthrough race. I don't have a photo of that, but the race is CIM, and that was back in 2018. And this race, I ran a 3:15 marathon, and then in California, a few months later, I ran a 2:53. So like a 20-minute cutoff time. I just put in the work, and I felt like, hey, I'm finally back. I feel healthy. I've gotten all of my professional things done. Why not start chipping away at running again and get back to what I really love? And so that summer after this race, I just put in the work again and had an outstanding race. And then I had people ask me, are you going to go for the Olympic marathon trials time? And I was just like, well, I guess so. So again, that insecurity found me again, and I didn't feel like I was worthy yet of running an even faster time, even though I was so close, less than 10 minutes. And so just to put it in perspective, to run the marathon qualifying time, you have to run a 6:17 average per mile to qualify for 26 miles. And so at that time, when I had qualified, when I had run a 2:53, I was at 6:37-ish, so just under 6:40, pretty close. But I knew I had to put in some more work. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll try. Everybody believes in me. Why not try again? And again, the running community here is very supportive. So I've been really lucky to find a group of women that have accepted me into training, because you cannot do it alone. But a lot of the times, again, you do find yourself being the only person of color in a running group. And so I find myself a lot of the times in this circle where I am the only one. And for me, whenever I am running a race, I have to tie it to something else. And for me, running the Olympic marathon trials was, or trying to qualify at least, was making it a point to show people of color that they can make it in this space. They can be a runner should they choose that, and they can have goals. And even for Hispanic women at the age of 30, it is very rare that you find somebody choosing such a selfish goal. And I felt like I had to create this goal for myself, because it was no longer about me anymore. It was for women of color to really understand that you can do something so different, like having a goal of qualifying for the Olympic trials. It has no monetary value, but it brings a lot of value to yourself and to your community. And so I felt like I had to have this goal, and I had to at least try to show people that it is okay to try for something that is purely for your own benefit. So I started on this goal, and I actually tried 3 times to qualify. The first attempt that I tried was in June 2019, and I ran a 2:47. So it was just off by a couple of seconds. And that race was also very challenging. It was hot outside, and I remember getting to mile 20 and feeling like, all right, I don't even know if I got this. I feel like stepping off the track now. I feel like stepping off the course now. Who am I for thinking that I could do this? And I remember, actually, it was mile 19, and I saw my boyfriend, and he was taking photos of me. And he said that, he's like, when I saw you at mile 19, you were still trying. And even though you weren't going at it, he's like, it was just so fun to see you try. So I always think about that a lot of the time, is you never know what could happen if you just try. So I went back at it again. I finished that race, and I said, okay, I'm not done yet. I need to try again. So I went back again in December 2019. I laced up, and I started my race in California again, where I had an amazing day the year before. And again, working through those insecurities when you're in the elite corral. So you have corrals when you start, and I was in the sub-elite corral. Again, the only woman of color, or I was probably one of few. I think there was like one other woman in there that was a woman of color, and you start the line with everybody else. And that day was also very challenging. But I have learned that even though you don't make it once or twice, you still have to try again. If that is your goal and there's a mission to it, you really have to try and dig deep and work through those insecurities. So I didn't make it that day. I actually had to DNF, so I stepped off the course. So funny thing was, my shoes were the problem this time. They were too tight. My toenails came off, so I have no toenails anymore. And I had to be carried off the course. So again, I kind of reevaluated. I was like, do I want to do this again? I have one more shot to qualify, and it's in January 2020. What do I do? So again, I luckily got a bib at Houston, the last chance to qualify. And again, I had amazing support that day. The marathon committee, they opened up more bibs. I got really lucky. And then there was about 30 other women that were trying to qualify for the very last time. And so going into that race, I think all of the insecurities of all the attempts that I had tried and everything that I had been through was kind of a culmination of all the last 10 years of my life here in Houston. So I would say that Houston was probably the race that I had to qualify for all of those reasons. All the things that Houston had given me was community. It had given me health back. It had given me a lot of purpose and meaning. And I knew that day that I was going to be surrounded by a lot of just, I think, support, camaraderie, and a lot of my friends that had known about my story. And a lot of my Latino community also came out to support me. I had gotten countless messages from women that were like me, that were runners or that were running that day, saying, you know, it's really nice to see you trying, and it's really nice to see somebody like me out there fast. So whenever I run and I try to have this huge goal for myself, I try to really think about the other people that are benefiting from it, whether it's maybe they're trying to overcome an eating disorder like me, or they just need to see somebody else like them doing hard things. So that day I qualified. It was I think 2:43:56 was the time, and then the official time was 2:44:04. So I remember finishing, and I remember one of my best friends, she was there, and she's Colombian, and she came over and she was like crying, and I wasn't even crying. I think I was just so relieved and just like finally checked it off my list. But she was like, you have no idea how amazing this is. She's like, there was only 2 other Hispanic women in the field with you right now, and you 2 were the ones that qualified. Everybody else was white. And I think at the time I didn't really understand what was the impact of that. But, you know, leading up to the trials, there was a lot of media attention around, you know, being a woman of color and being in the trials. There was only 25 other women that were Hispanic in a field of 500 women. So they took the data and they looked at it, and then they looked at the income levels of all the different women. And so the majority were over 150K household. And so again, it just goes to show that socioeconomic status does affect women of color, and what we're able to do just for fun, leisure, and then eventually how we impact each other. Just with these goals that we set for ourselves. Do I have the ability? Do I have the means to chase something so luxurious? Because it is a luxury to run. And that was one of the articles that I talked about in one of the interviews that I talked about in the New York Times. So I was actually selected and pulled from a survey to talk about why were American women running so fast this year. And I had touched on the luxury of marathoning and what that meant. And so even though we see women as a whole gaining more economic power, where do Hispanic women lie on that? Where is our economic power? And so I think it's really important that we do highlight more runners of color, because it could definitely swing the pendulum around a little bit and maybe give us a little bit more equality when it comes to athletics and who was representing these communities that again are still American. Recently I was even interviewed for a Runner's World article on being a person of color in the running community and around racism. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, I definitely encourage reading a little bit more about those stories, because it does go beyond what my experiences is. I've been very fortunate to be a runner of color in Houston and not experience it. But I will say that it has been a very eye-opening experience, and things that I was unaware of even on my own. It's caused me to pause and listen to my other fellow runners who are persons of color. How insecurity continues to help and fuel my running is, again, really going back to all the times when I had to work through insecurity, having imposter syndrome, being the only person in the room. And now what does that mean for me as somebody that has this platform? It's really encouraging that when I have this platform, I have to make space for more people. And I have to also encourage that that people of color can again, have goals that are purely for themselves. I think a lot of times we bear a lot of different burdens, and it's just, again, the responsibility that we have for each other is encouraging these goals that are just purely for fun. And even in my profession now, I am one of very few women of color as a dietitian. I think only 10% of dietitians are dietitians of color. And so even now I do see where it has worked to my benefit to serve my community. But now it's really encouraging to see more dietitians of color being highlighted, and how we can definitely change the conversation around food, nutrition, and just even having more acceptingness of different kinds of bodies, and again, more color in these sports. I'm going to open it up to questions now, but I want to thank everybody for listening, for your time and attention, and for bearing with me if I got a little teary-eyed and emotional. So thank you so much. I just kind of want to show a quick photo. That was me at Chevron. Super happy. Actually, the girl in the yellow singlet, she's one of my training partners, and now she lives in Portland. So very, very lucky to have her by my side. Unfortunately, she did not qualify that day, but she pulled me along the entire way. And that's me at the Olympic trials.